Hello and welcome to the Chop Shop. My name is Dion Tucker. In this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles, I'm going to speak to Mr. John Romero. John is the principal trombonist in the New York Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. He's going to share some of his experiences with us that's led him to be one of the top classical trombonists currently performing. Let's check out what John has to say.
Hey, what's up?
John, how's it going, man?
It's going. Yeah.
That's good. As long as it's still going, that's a good thing.
Yeah. Just keep going.
Yeah, that's right, man. Thank you so much for coming on this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles. For those of you that don't know, this is the great John Romero. He is the principal trombonist in the New York Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. He also teaches at a few universities in the area, and just overall badass on the trombone. I'm really happy that you were able to come on with us today. So then, can you start us out? This is going to be good for me because the only time I've gotten a chance to play with you, we were about probably 50 feet away from each other. We did a socially distanced brass ensemble thing.
Oh, yeah. The Lincoln Center thing, right?
Yeah, the Lincoln Center.
Oh, okay.
Anthony Barfield's Invictus piece. And it was a mashup of players from the Met, from the New York Phil, and a couple players from Jazz at Lincoln Center. And we played this amazing brass ensemble piece. It was the first gig that I had played since this whole pandemic started. But everybody was at least 12 feet apart. So me and you were probably about 50 feet apart. So
Yeah, man, that was a tough situation. I think that would be a good exercise in college, to practice phasing, because, man, it was like the guys at the end, you probably were sounding like a full half second behind me, it seemed, All
Definitely.
Crazy.
Definitely. But I was like, man, I'll take the echo over no music right now.
Yeah, that's very true, yeah.
Yeah, that was good, man. So, man, could you start off by telling the audience a little bit about where you're from and how did this whole trombone journey start for you?
Yeah, sure. It's quite the story. I'll try to tell it well. So I grew up in Longview, Texas, which for those of you who don't know much about Texas, it's near Tyler, Texas. Which, if that doesn't mean anything to you, it's near Shreveport, Louisiana. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, it's around Dallas. It's about 2 hours east of Dallas. So it's funny. Everyone I know from Texas knows where Longview is, and no one outside of it does. So anyway, but yeah, but it's fairly rural. It's population about 80,000 now. Not too big. But I started playing trombone in 5th grade when I was 10. I went to a not a prep school. They called it a pep school there, for some reason. So they started band a year earlier than everyone else. I had a choice between orchestra band or choir, and it was a no-brainer for me because my two older sisters played trumpet, and I was extremely competitive, and I wanted to beat them. So I said, I'm going to play trumpet and I'm going to beat them, then I get to band and we try out, and by the time they get to the R's, going in alphabetical order, they already had like 12 trumpets. So what they told me was, oh, your lips are too big. You got to play either trombone or tuba, And then, of course, I think it was just they had too many trumpets. But I come home and I tell my mom that, and she's like, oh, no, you're not playing the tuba. It's too loud. And, little did she know. So I think she's regretted that ever since.
I bet.
Yeah. That's kind of how I got my start.
Okay, that's funny because when I first started playing, it was around the same time. It was like 5th going into 6th grade, and it was the same thing. They went alphabetical order. By the time they got to T, there were no more trumpets. It wasn't about like they're just like, there are no more trumpets, so you're going to play the trombone. They did tell me I could switch over once the year started, but once the year started, they're like, no, we need trombonists. Stay on trombone. You're a natural. keep doing it, so
Right.
here I am.
Yeah, I ended up loving it. I would have been perfectly happy with trombone if they had just told me it was a bass slide trumpet. I would have thought it was something special, But I still got to compete with my sisters indirectly, and we did chair tests every week. And if I wasn't first chair, I would practice my butt off, just to make up for it. That's kind of really been my primary motivation since I picked up the instrument.
Interesting. Do you feel like your sisters playing trumpet kind of motivated you to want to play just any instrument or music in general, or more was it like, I want to be better than them at what they're doing, so I'm going to do this, and then you fell in love with it, or was it vice versa?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think specifically on trombone, I'll tell you a small anecdote. The first time I heard a professional trombonist was when my band director played a recording of Joe Alessi playing Bluebells of Scotland. And I heard that, and I was like, I had no idea the trombone could do that. That's amazing. Wow. I'm going to beat him. So like I was just hyper competitive as a kid. I wanted to be the best. I heard that Pokemon song. I want to be the very.
Yeah, right.
But I played piano a little bit as a kid. I quit after like a year, but I got back into it, and I just I really from an early age just loved playing music and being involved in producing music.
Yeah. So when you were coming up in Texas, I know Texas has just like a crazy music program. There's like tons of students there. There's like tons of competitions. I mean, it happens in other places, but I mean, Texas is just a big place. So there's like a lot more people. Do you feel like that competitive spirit kind of helped you excel as you started to play, or was it something that like you were good at it, so when you won, that motivated you? Or was it like, oh, I want to be better? Well, you said you want to be better than Joe Alessi. That's setting the bar pretty high there.
It was. I think it might have been a little too high for a middle schooler. I enjoyed progress for the sake of progress. I liked that feeling of progression. But I don't think I would have pushed myself nearly as hard if I hadn't had that Texas band system competition mindset the whole time. I know a lot of my colleagues, when I was, going through the college system, it was an enigma to me how they could just be like, oh, I don't really care about competition. I just want to get better. I just want to play better. And I was like, I don't get that at all. It was really, feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but yeah, I'm pretty competitive.
Yeah. No, because it's, all of these things kind of tie in. That's why I like to start with, people's foundation, and kind of seeing where they come from. The environment that you come from has so much to do with shaping how we are now, whether it's competition, whether it's just, I love doing it, that's a big part of how we are now. Obviously you're in a fantastic place now, so that helped you to get to where you are now. So, it's something to be embraced, the competitive aspect of the mental way of looking at it. Did you feel that any of the people that you were in competitions with, like, was there a large African American makeup in these competitions, like in high school and stuff, the all-state band, stuff like that?
Yeah, not really at the competitive level, unfortunately. One of my good friends, Leandre Benton, who's teaching in the Texas region still, he was second chair. He was my first mate,
Gotcha.
And he made area for the first time his senior year, and he and I were, I think, the only two people of color at area, and I think I might have been the only person of color at All-State when I finally made it my senior year. No, that's not true. There were a couple people from Brownsville, Texas, who made it as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's definitely been majority white. Competitive arena.
Yeah. So how do you feel that played into the competitive aspect of it? I mean, here you are as like a young African American person who's like excelling in the field, but you're probably at these competitions with mostly white students. How did that make you feel stepping into those arenas, even at a young age?
To be perfectly honest, at a young age, I was completely unaware of, the idea that might play a factor in how people might treat me or how people might judge me in a non-screened audition. I'll tell you what question I got a lot as a mixed person. In high school, black people would ask me this, white people would ask me this: what are you? They didn't know if I was Mexican or half Asian or what, and I'd have to explain to them my mom's black, my dad's white, and
Right.
and so I never really fit into any category to people I grew up with, and it really wasn't until college when people, I mean, I don't think I've ever been like super discriminated against. I've had a lot of lucky breaks, but like I didn't really gain an awareness of that kind of thing until late college, I think.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. Where did you go to college?
I went to college at Baylor University for my bachelor's, and then Rice University for my master's.
Okay. So when you first stepped into those environments, were you, I mean, I would imagine you were in the minority of being African American students in the music program. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, for sure. At
Okay.
both universities.
Okay. So how was that, stepping in now when we're in university, now we have not just the music people we're around, we have all of these other adults that we're interacting with that view us in a certain way through their own lens. How did that being in that environment start to bring awareness to the quote unquote difference, that people might see in you?
I think most of my teachers were white as well, and I think I grew up kind of the smart kid, the nerdy kid, and so people would say, stop acting so white,
Right.
and that it really hit me kind of late that like that's kind of a terrible statement, it's like why can't I be what I am and also be smart or be studious or practice a lot, that
Yeah.
I didn't like those. I never really liked those stereotypes or those questions. As far as how it affected me musically, I think I was always. It hit me very late that that I was a disadvantaged student, and I'm not. I'm not sure that's entirely because of my race, but I was always mad at these city kids who had all these resources and their parents had all this money to give them lessons. And I remember this one guy who would always beat me at area, and I wouldn't make state because of this one guy, and I won't name names,
Right.
but he was a white guy, and he was wealthier than I was, and he took lessons, and I was just like, I just want to be able to prove that I would just want to have to like to me it didn't make sense that I should be disadvantaged simply because I didn't have as much money, and of course upon learning more and more about Black history in America and why that's kind of a systemic issue. It's like that just really struck me as completely unfair because I worked harder than anyone I knew from like my hometown. And, once I started getting some of those advantages through taking on loans, essentially, it's like, oh, I started improving a lot. And it's like, that's just, I don't know, it just struck me as like unfair that money should determine so much about a person's success in the music career.
Yeah, that's so true.
You
That's so true. Just having the advantage, like you said, to music lessons. I got lucky in the fact I went to a performing arts high school, and we got private lessons like weekly almost. That was just part of what happened. So I was lucky in that sense. There were some other players like throughout the county. I grew up in Miami that were fantastic players that had no private lessons, and couldn't afford or weren't even thinking about taking private lessons, so that part of it is so true. It's interesting though how it probably drove your work ethic a little bit more than the person that was taking the lessons, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I remember getting to college and being so shocked at how polished all these players were compared to me and how they just simply knew things about the music world. Like I was the most naive student I think Brent Phillips had ever seen walk through the door. We don't have time for my whole story about how I lucked my way into the music school. But let's just say I ended up doing everything wrong in the application process and taking the audition for the music school the day before classes started, which is not at all usual, of course.
Right.
And then I get in there and all these students are like, yeah, so who was your teacher in high school? And, oh, what excerpts have you learned? And I'm like, what's an excerpt? You know?
Yeah.
And it was like that whole world that people, you're kind of expected to know exists. The whole lingo, the culture, like, I just never had access to that growing up in Longview. You know, I had maybe like 4 lessons my entire time in high school, you know, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It's definitely drove my work ethic for sure, trying to catch up, and you know, that sense of unfairness that this guy gets lessons, well, I'm just gonna have to practice my way around that or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's a big part of it. You know, I think inherently as Black people, we have a drive, or sometimes it's instilled in us that we have to work much harder because sometimes these opportunities don't pop up for us because of our ethnicity. But when we do get in the opportunity, we're going to prove to you that we're supposed to be there and that we've worked harder than anybody else in the room. You know, that's kind of like a mentality that's instilled in us. And I think sometimes it comes from us not having those little perks, you know, and when we do get privy to these little, you know, what's an excerpt? Okay, wait, I'm gonna learn all of these. You know, what's this? No, I'm gonna learn all of these and play them better than, you know, people have known about them. So that drive, I think, kind of can sometimes make us kick it up a notch in a good way. You know, I think for me at least, as you started to go through your higher education now and you start learning a little bit more and things start evening out, did you have any African American teachers along the way that kind of helped inspire you to keep going? Or like when was the first time that you had an African American music teacher?
To be perfectly honest, I don't remember ever having one.
Wow.
You know, like that's how white the education faculty was at my schools. I remember the first time I played with, he may have done a master class. I'm trying to remember. It's a little hazy, but Tony Baker at UNT is, I think, the first Black, you know, musician period that I saw at a high level. In the Dallas, the DFW, you know, kind of Texas area. So, I mean, yeah, that was just a real lack of that kind of experience for me and I guess everyone else in those institutions.
Yeah. Did that have any effect on you, seeing Tony in that position and hearing him play and just seeing him excel? Did that have any effect on you as a young man?
You know, I just remember it was a real kind of culture shock. Just getting, I remember a gig specifically that I did with him while I was in college, some church gig. Just like, you know, he's a super nice guy, and just like kind of, you know, it's hard to explain kind of the experience because, you know, it's just a little bit of a culture shock, just like talking with someone, working with someone who just, you know, grew up different than the people I had been taught by and I had worked with previously. You know, I think the whiteness of music culture is just kind of assumed. It's like, you know, he doesn't call himself a jazz player. He's like classical jazz hybrid. He does whatever he wants, essentially. You know, he doesn't like the labels. But you know, just the idea that you shouldn't have to apologize for being good at classical as a Black musician. I think that was something I hadn't seen before.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, I wonder, because when I first started playing, it was I was playing classical and jazz, but my lessons were all classical based. You know, I studied jazz outside of my high school private teacher. I took private jazz lessons, but I think I stood, not only because I love playing jazz, but I always wondered if I stayed in the classical field and tried to excel at that, how that would have been. And I honestly can say that because of my race, it made me lean more towards pursuing jazz earlier on. You know, if I had come to that decision maybe later in life, but I saw more people that looked like me doing that. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I had never seen a Black classical musician, except for my high school band director who played alto saxophone, classical alto sax. But I never saw him perform. Really. He was teaching us most of the time. So once I started seeing people like Vincent Gardner and Wyclef Gordon and guys like that, I saw myself, in them. And I was like, I can do that. Not only did I love to do it, it reinforced like I could do that. So it's always interesting, like going back and thinking about what that imagery of that first person that you see that's like you doing it, what kind of effect that has on you,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
it was kind of a light bulb moment for me, for sure. And of course, moving to New York, I've seen more black musicians than I have in my whole life, and but like it really hit me. Not even really in the Fort Worth Symphony, because to some degree, I feel like I had come to terms with the idea that like black people are just a minority in the classical world, and and I mean also I grew up mixed. I grew up with a white dad, and I saw I went to essentially a white church, and I grew up surrounded by white culture, and I was comfortable with it. And to be perfectly honest, I wasn't as comfortable with black culture because I just it just wasn't a thing in the area of music I was surrounded by, and that thing about like seeing people who are like you in the world, like it happens for like female composers or conductors. Like the first time they see someone who's just doing that job, it's like if you don't ever see that, it kind of, especially for young kids, it just kind of makes you think like maybe I can't do this. Essentially, on some level, it's just like, or maybe I shouldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and then there's also the aspect of like we all want to be surrounded by people we're comfortable with. And like what you're used to, what you grew up with is comfortable for most people, and so like I said, for me, I grew up fairly comfortable around white culture. I never really felt like I experienced massive discrimination in any overt way, except for one time at a gas station, which was a really weird experience. But that was in the middle of nowhere, Texas. But anyway, like it's been nice just getting to play next to Weston and Billy and just like West. I remember Weston took me backstage at a Wynton Marsalis concert, and he knew all these guys, and it was just the wildest experience for me. Just like I can't even describe it. Just like I felt so out of my element, honestly. Just like oh, like this is a whole thing, like and I felt honestly like sad that I didn't get the opportunity to kind of grow up around that culture and just like I mean, who knows? Maybe I would have been a jazz musician too if I had thought that was like a viable thing for me.
Right. No, I was gonna say, did you like in the groups coming up? Were you usually, or chamber groups or these different types of groups you played in? Were you usually like the only black musician or one of the only? And if so, when the first time you played with an all black group? And if so, what was that contrast like of playing with all black musicians as compared to what you were used to?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I've had a real lack of experience with that. I think the first time I played with an truly all black ensemble has been the Wyclef Gordon projects. That, we both did, and I mean, it's just. It's all been virtual, unfortunately. But even just reading the emails and the Zoom calls and all that stuff, it's been just different. And I think that's okay. And it's unfortunate that that difference is not as big a part in the classical world for sure as it could be. Because I mean, music is based on experience, personal experience, and if you're shutting out, or if you don't get to experience a whole sector of the world. Like that's kind of unfortunate. Yeah,
that's a big part of like how this came to be. How I started this whole Black Trombone Chronicles thing was because of that same Black Excellence Trombone Choir you're talking about. And when we did a group Zoom call, it was amazing to see all of us on the screen at once. Never seen anything like that before. And I just really started to take a look and realize, wait a minute, like here are some of the best players across all different kinds of genres in one place, what are these stories like? What are these things that we have in common that we've never had the opportunity to talk about, really? Let's start putting them down and documenting them. So that's why this is so important, as to what we're talking about, and you coming on. That's why I really appreciate you doing this. Let's talk a little bit about your position in the New York Met. Now, it's yourself, and you were mentioning Weston. Weston Sprott is also another fantastic trombone player who plays in the New York Metropolitan Orchestra. Let me ask this question. I've been dying to ask you this.
Sure.
Are you guys the first two African Americans to hold that high of a position in a major orchestra?
That's a good question. To be honest, I haven't looked it up, but I would really not be surprised if that's the case. I mean, I remember first day on the job. What's his name? We had an associate musician there as well, and so it was Weston, me, Billy Hunter, and then I'm blanking on the name. Sorry, but four black musicians in a row at the Met, and that had to have been like the first time that had ever happened.
Yeah.
It's just not common.
Yeah. It's, as I was thinking about it, I was just like, man, that might be the first time. It's kind of something that you're in. Of course, you're in it for the music, and you're there because you deserve it. But sometimes you stop and you look at it from a different perspective. It's like, that's huge, and I think that's big for young classical players that may be coming up that may think there's only room for one of us per section. Like there's room that could be the whole section, but if you never see it, like, why would you even think of it, really? Right. What type of things do you think, so you played in the Fort Worth Symphony for a while, and we all know the insides. We see our section mates. We come into rehearsal. We see somebody checking their phone, reading a book, reading the newspaper. We all have different little issues that we deal with before we play music. What type of difference do you see as having a black section mate, and the type of things that they might be looking at before and the issues that they might talk to you about off the bandstand, compared to your experiences before? Has that made a difference in your overall being in the orchestra?
Yeah, I mean, so in the Fort Worth Symphony, I was in a big long brass line of white people, and they're all super nice guys. But yeah, I mean, there definitely is a difference in kind of the general discourse, I think. The second trombonist in the Fort Worth Symphony was a big cigar guy, and he's kind of the archetype of the libertarian, and just, I don't know. I mean, we just talked about different stuff, and then with Weston, like, I see him come in with, like, how to be anti-racist, and just like, except for, like, learning some poker strategies. I think, that was Paul, who was trying to gain the upper hand on Weston, because Weston knows all the math,
Okay.
Wes, I feel like I've never seen Weston come in with a book that didn't have something to do with, like, race and race relations and that kind of thing. And so that's just been pretty wild for me. And like, we've had conversations, like, at the bar after a concert or something, and just being able to, like, talk frankly about blackness and the issues in America and how it all relates together, just, like, has not been something I've ever had. And to be honest, I've gained way more of an awareness since coming to the Met and living in New York about my own blackness and what that means, and maybe, like, reviewing kind of past events and, like, through a different understanding of how the world works. And that's been a whole journey that I am still on. Making me think about a lot of things too.
Yeah. I mean, man, I don't think that journey ever stops. And I think as we are constantly morphing into these different spaces where we have to fit in, because it's a matter of survival 9 times out of 10, we learn a lot of things about ourselves, so, like, that part of the journey, it's really interesting to me to hear how it's shaped you to this point, because it's not necessarily like you grew up in these situations where you're around that. This is something that's kind of a more recent, adaptation to your awareness. It's, I mean, not saying you weren't aware before, but you're experiencing these things in a different light now, just being in New York and being around different people.
I mean, you could say I wasn't aware before. You would not be offending me at all. I was naive about a lot of things growing up. I just wanted to sit down, practice, and get better at the trombone. That was kind of my modus operandi, and I did not think about the wider world. I didn't really think about anything about how the world worked until about 2016, and I think we all know why that is. And that's when I really started. That's when I got a job. That's when I really became an adult, quote unquote, and and I don't know, just a lot of things changed then, and it's like it's been a journey. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. How do you feel that part of the journey affected you musically? Do you feel like you started to bring a little bit more of that to your playing?
Yeah, I think I've always been a big proponent of musicality first, technique later, and I always tell my students, like, you should be such a great craftsman and artist that you could chip every single note and people would still come up to you after and say, that's the most musical thing I've ever heard, And I've always really admired the way jazz musicians and the way I was taught, to think of jazz, like there are no wrong notes, right? It's all how you treat them. And and I always admired that, and since kind of gaining more of an awareness of just the world at large and the way race works and all that stuff, in terms of what it's done for my sense of music or how I approach it, I think especially recently, like I feel like I've wanted to do more, like not necessarily, I feel like my playing, that's my craft. It's I don't know if it makes me practice differently, but it makes me want to use it for more good in the world, if that makes sense. Like I want to actually do something with it that actually matters, instead of just entertaining people.
Yes. I think that's a big part of it. I mean, once again, that's kind of how we're here. Being stuck inside the house will force you to figure out different things. But that's a big part of it for me. I always think about how I'm representing myself as a African American man when I step into a job situation, whatever the situation is. Now that all of this is going on, and we're kind of, we're trombone players, so like, what can we do to help this whole big issues that we're having as Black people? I think that us sharing our stories and our perspective is key. It's paramount, because if people don't know, then like, what are you going to do? You can't be mad at people for not knowing. If people do know and they continue to act a certain way, well, that's a whole nother issue.
Right.
Ignorance
versus well, whatever the word is for that other issue.
yeah. So bringing that, and I feel like with all the protests and all the things going on, I had that same type of, what can I do? Really, how can I help? And the thing that I know how to do best is play music. I'm also know video and photography and stuff. So just being able to share like these perspectives is absolutely important and absolutely paramount at this time. This is like, I feel like this is our 70s. The 70s, there was like all kinds of stuff going on. This is our time, and our music should represent this, and our people should represent this, like all of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. No, go ahead. What are you gonna say?
Oh, just it's a whole interesting problem kind of to try to solve. Like, how do we make things better? How do we get people to just shut up and listen? Like I'm in my Facebook kind of friends, I'm kind of known for being someone who's not afraid to start arguments, Sure. And I try to keep things civil. I don't think anyone gains anything by calling each other names, but that's like in terms of like word crafting and debate strategy, like it's so difficult just to like get people to drop their ego and actually just listen, like honestly listen, like, hey, I think this is an issue, I don't know, like I think music can be a really, really powerful way to achieve that on the emotional spectrum. Just, I mean, I don't know. I think about like you read about like you hear about jazz even in just regular old history, and how influential the invention of that was, and I feel like musicians maybe underrate how powerful that can be in the long term or even in the short term.
Yeah, very true. I think at the deeper core of it, whatever style of music it is, it's still about the vibrations that the players put off, and regardless of what genre we may be playing, when a person plays, you can feel their whole personal vibration, everything that they're about, and
yeah, absolutely.
The more advanced your ear gets, the quicker you can hear that and distinct that. But I think even the layman, when they're listening to music, can feel that, and when they see somebody that might look different than what they're used to seeing up there, and they can feel that vibration coming from the person, it's a different thing. And I think it's on us to make sure that we embrace that, while we have people's attention.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I always tell my students basically that exact same thing. I basically tell them like everything that is in your head will come out of the bell, whether you want it to or not. And so you have to develop a very strong message. You have to develop, and not just musically, one thing I was taught, just from a musical perspective is from the very first note, you want everyone to sit at the edge of their seats. You don't want them to lean forward like, oh, what's he going to do next?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's really interesting how visceral that can be, in terms of just, sending a message through music.
Yeah. I had the fortunate chance to be on TV for a couple of years, and when we're in the recording studio, when you make a mistake or something, it's like amplified, like by 10 times. When you're on TV and you make a mistake, it's like everything. Not only can people see it, but they're just like, you did that. I saw you do, but it definitely made me aware, of things about myself. Cause I'd go back and I'd look at myself and be like, I can tell I'm not into it at that moment. Like it just reads so strong. So a lot of what you're telling your students of make people be on the edge of their seat from when you step on the stage, your performance has started.
It's theater. I mean, it's live theater, but the language is music,
That's right.
I had the opportunity to do a little bit of theater in high school, and it really opened my eyes to just how loudly you have to, well, literally shout if you're doing unmiked theater, just like you have to be so big, and on camera, especially if you've learned to play that loud kind of role, musical role, it's like, yeah, I can see how having that microphone right there, that TV camera right there, that like would feel extra, scary, especially if you make a mistake.
Man, it's like your soul is exposed. You're like, sorry, that was me.
Yeah.
Yeah. You do a lot of the taping for some of these like high school auditions. Like you'll record the music, and I think I'm only recently discovering this. I've seen that you've done it for several years, but I've seen the last couple ones, and I'll tell you, man, it's like, I don't know a lot of those excerpts, but it definitely makes me want to learn them, and it makes me want to play them. And I just think like, what a fantastic example for young any musician of any race, but especially a young Black musician, to turn on that screen and to see you execute those things, those excerpts in that way. it's got to be like incredibly inspiring. And I think there's a lot there that maybe you might not see, because like you go in and play them and maybe you step away, you don't read the comment, you don't get that feedback. But coming from a professional, I'm like, man, this is huge, and it inspires me just watching you do those excerpts. So hats off to you for that.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually do go back and read the comments, because half the time they're just hilarious. You know, these high schoolers, these freshmen, like, you made a mistake. You were exactly 1/32 of a eighth note off here, and you were 2 cents flat. And I'm just like, okay, well, you play it then. You know?
Yeah, right.
Okay, yeah. Let's hear you. You were, yeah. So
yeah, right.
But no, I mean, I see a lot of the comments where it's like, this is so helpful, you know, and it's definitely, it's a feel good thing, you know. Yeah, I mean, I every time I do them, I'm struck by how good these students have it these days, you know, with like, you know, they have YouTube, they have 1,000,001 things that they can watch to improve their craft, and a lot of them don't. And like, yeah, you should maybe go do some research about your instrument, you know?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I think about like when I first started learning jazz, you know, there wasn't YouTube where you could just punch in whatever song you're looking for and it come up and it be in video, like, and you can see the person play it. My situation was like, I went to performing arts high school, so it was in downtown Miami. So you had to buy like lunch from like a McDonald's or something like that. So my mom would give me $20 for the week, you know, $5 a day, but that's only 4 days worth. So, you know, we can do the math there. And so like what I would do was, there was a Best Buy that was about 1.5 miles from where I lived. And I would take $11, $12 of that, and I would go buy a CD every week out of my lunch money. So half the week I was hungry, the other half of the week, I'm checking out whatever it is I bought. But that sacrifice of having to give up half your lunch money to build your collection like that, like, students have no idea how good they have it to just be. But in a way, I feel like, if I had all of this access, what would it be like? You know, because I appreciate what I had to go through to get to where I am now.
For sure. I mean, I think it's funny, like, going back and listening to some old things of mine, old bands I used to like that I only had access to because my sisters bought the CD, you know, or something. And, like, some of them are just awful, you know, and it's like sometimes you just like the recording because you had to do that sacrifice, you know. But now I think the problem now for younger generations is that they have access to all of the greats, and for the ones who are aware, it's really easy to get unrealistic expectations of where they're supposed to be at that time. You know, like you have Instagram influencers, and you have these people who want to be professional cosplayers or something, and like they're just constantly thinking they're not good enough. You know, and that's definitely something I've tried to tackle more as a teacher. The dedication thing is for sure a problem sometimes in younger students, but I don't know, man. It's a different world now.
Yeah, it sure is, man. It sure is. You know, some for the better, though a lot for the worse. In some strange kind of ways. And so leading into that, let me ask you one more thing. What advice do you have for a young, I would say a young African-American trombonist that's coming up that sees people like you, sees people like Weston, sees people like Tony, but they're coming up in a different time? You know, they have a lot of the stuff we were talking about. What kind of advice can you give them to help them stay or get them to the top of their craft as they're developing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that this sounds so hokey, and I know if I were to hear this as a kid, I probably would be like, okay, whatever. But like, just, you know, just you have to believe in yourself if you want to make it. You know, you should believe in yourself. Like, there's nothing different between the atoms that constitute you and someone else. You know, just because, you know, white people are in the majority does not mean that they operate fundamentally different. You can do classical, you can do jazz, you can be one of the greats. You know, you can do whatever you want, but to do that, you have to believe that you can first. Because I'm a big believer that, like, if you really on some fundamental level think that you cannot, then you're going to practice and your brain's going to be like, well, why should I bother putting in the energy to change my neurons if it's not going to work out anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're 100% right, man. I can testify to that with my bout of dealing with focal dystonia, where I had to retrain my entire way of playing. And there was a quick point where I was like, okay, it's over. And then very quickly I was like, no, like I'm not done. And I had to have that belief in myself, first of all, that it could be done. So much of what I read was that it couldn't be done. I was like, it's going to be done, Yeah. And so that just helped my trajectory of there was no option of failure. The only option was to complete the task,
Yeah. I feel like to some degree that's like you're describing kind of a positive ego, like it's okay to like think to yourself, yeah, I could, just because other people can't does not mean I can't, or that kind of goes into competition strategy, but like you're allowed to advocate for yourself, you don't have to apologize for being good or better than other people even.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, thank God you don't, because in your playing, I think that, from having this conversation, I've learned so much in knowing that the way we are as people definitely comes through our musicianship. You have a certain fire in your playing that is definitely part of who you are. And it doesn't come off as competition, but it comes off as I'm going to be like as good as I want to be. There's nothing in my way but me. And when you play, it's like, this is me. This is what you're going to get. Take it or leave it. That is something that is not so easy for people to come by, as in any field, not just music, in any field, people have a hard time being themselves, so yeah. I really think it's great that you display that in who you are.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I mean that's definitely an attitude that I had to cultivate. It didn't just come to me naturally. I get very, very nervous when I'm on stage, and everyone always tells me, "What do you mean? You just look like you're just completely calm." And I'm like, "That's because I'm frozen." That idea that like, yeah, you just like you shout to people, "This is how it goes," and screw you if you don't like it. That is something I remember taking walks at Baylor, just like I had to get out of my own head in the practice room. I'd just take a walk and just think like, what kind of person do I have to be in order to develop these sets of skills or this kind of mindset? And just like it was a whole meditation thing.
Yeah. I definitely think we have to bring more of that mental aspect to our music. The music is kind of just the physical part, but this is driving everything. Right. So I think that everything that you've shared with us and your perspective is going to be so helpful to the audience. I know it's been helpful to me, for sure, and I think it'll be helpful to everybody that watches this interview. And I want to thank you so much, John, for coming on, man, and sharing some of your insights and perspectives with us, man. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, man. It's been great getting to share them and talking with you, and yeah.
Yeah, well, we'll do this again. I was thinking about expanding this series to some like trombone geek stuff and like doing some playing and stuff like that later on down the line. So maybe if you be down, we can have you back on.
That'd be great. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. So thank you, John, for coming on, and thank you all for watching this episode of the Black Trombone Chronicles, and I'll see you next time.